So thanks for joining the show, Glenn. I appreciate it, man.
Oh no, man. I'm happy to be here. I was hoping I'd be on for like how do I maintain my chiseled physique at this age, but I guess I'll settle for this topic for sure.
Well, we can always have you back on, and
Yeah.
we already had Kareem, and Kareem kind of fit that mold, so we're happy to fit you in here.
Yeah, we all got to play to our strengths.
Oh, dude. So we were catching up beforehand, and I mean, just in general, 2020 has been insane. Like I'm 33. How old are you? 32, 31, 30? Jesus, dude. How are we even friends?
Do you really want me to answer like how many years you took to graduate?
Yeah. Blood and all that. No, but it's just like, I don't remember a year in my lifetime that even comes close. I mean, 9/11 was bad, but it was different in that it was very like a one singular unifying event with what felt at the time like a clear-cut enemy that we could all rally against. But this has just been like so strange and abstract. It's like COVID. You just there's just so much unknown.
Yeah.
And then everything that's going on in the world right now socially. Man, it's just like such a confusing time.
Yeah. And I mean, especially because 9/11, too, obviously was very traumatic and jarring for us as Americans. But if you think about it, like people go to war all the time in different countries, but like the pandemic, like that was like a worldwide phenomenon that hadn't been seen since like the Spanish flu of like 1900. Like this is, and that's not to minimize 9/11, but I'm just saying like this is like even on the scale of like for the world was unique. And then now like this with all these protests and riots, it's sort of like back to back to back. It's crazy.
Yeah,
it's
man.
absolutely crazy.
It is. Well, at least we don't have a hotly contested presidential election coming up.
Exactly.
I'm sure everyone will just chill out. But yeah, so, I mean, there's a couple of reasons that I wanted to have you on the show. And I know that you want to be a part of this conversation. I mean, we could probably spend hours just talking about your experience on the front lines, dealing with COVID and all the ramifications that that's had. But not even an elephant in the room, because I feel like the entire country and in some ways the world is so focused on this issue of like racism in America, and systematic racism that, I felt like who better among like my inner circle of friends to like talk about this issue with.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I will say, so I was a sociology major in college and, was African-American studies minor and did my thesis on like race-based health disparities. And my parents told me I would never do anything with that degree. And like, here we are now. And like, it's the confluence of everything. It is the most useful thing I have right now in talking to people about this. But it's crazy times. And I think we talked about this before. I think this is sort of a great, perfect conversation for just us as, a white father, a black father, want to talk about race relations in this country and like really for like, what's it going to look like for our children? And then, I mean, obviously then we can touch on the COVID stuff too, as well. Like that, that's another experience we can talk about. We can talk about it all.
Yeah. And I think, like it's so funny because we've been friends for a long time, and we're fortunate, at least, we have a shared college experience, and like we get exposed to people from all sorts of backgrounds, whether it be like socioeconomic, ethnically, like whatever it is, right? Like we actually got a pretty diverse friend group, which I think is hopefully like broadened our perspectives and kind of like, given us some understanding of other cultures and other people that, maybe I wouldn't have gotten had I not left home. But trying to make sense of everything that's going on right now, dude, it's been really hard to get my head around it. And I'll tell you why. What happened, just as like an outside observer to, George Floyd, was so traumatically jarring that it's just like, how does that happen in today's society, right? And then on top of that, you have all these like the race relations aspect of it. And it's like, okay, like, well, I'm a white person. I don't see this very often in my own day to day. It's not something I think about consciously. And then it's like, the more that like we as a country have been like focused to think about it, it's really caused me to like take pause. And I don't know the right way to handle it. And what I'm hearing, because I'm trying to listen, is people like, dude, like just stop talking for a minute, which is hard for me to do, as you know. So, you know, I wanted to have you on, and the intent would be like, dude, like, let's just like, you're in it, man. You're in it in so many different levels, like based on your profession, like your background, you know, being a black male in America. I really just want to like get your perspective on kind of like how this is impacting you.
Yeah, no, it's on many different levels, and I think the George Floyd thing is so sad and so tragic, and I think that is definitely captured the country's attention. And because it's pretty interesting, because you know, African Americans have been saying for years the police treat us differently, you know, and I don't know if white people just didn't believe it, because like, you know, their interactions with the police, they've always been upstanding citizens. Like, I don't really know what it is, and I'm not saying like the police all police or whatever, but I'm just saying like there has always been, even for myself who like has spent the majority of my definitely adult life in like affluent places, like I've been pulled over for no reason multiple times. Like I've been a passenger, asked for my ID for no reason. Like that's not a typical thing. And you know, so the reaction I have of when the police stop me is like fear, which is not normal for people. So that like that, and then to see how, though, the death, and I think it was, you know, I've been trying to rack my brain what makes this one so different. I think the look in the police officer's eyes was he was like just doing it, and like the people around screaming, saying stop, and just the lack of emotion. Like, I don't know if that's what's pushing people over the top. I don't actually have a good reason of like, what about this that like everyone, even the most right-wing person, or and it's not even necessarily right-wing, but even the staunchest deniers of this police brutality are all like, okay, like this is a problem.
This is unquestioned.
Yeah, and so it's good. It's a reckoning. And so I started off to say like, and like I definitely want to talk more about the George Floyd thing, but like if you actually want to know what's been bothering me and keeping me up at night so much is like the Amy Cooper situation of the woman in the park who basically pretended to call the cops on, or didn't pretend, call the cops on Christian Cooper, but pretended like she was getting attacked and when she wasn't.
Yeah.
And the reason why like that is a black man has been so, and especially for me now as a doctor or whatever, is that she is an educated, apparently progressive woman, graduated from like University of Chicago, you know, voted for Obama twice, right? Like, so she is like progressive. Like she is like, I'm sure like is what you know, would call liberal and everything. But like when she felt fear or was upset about being told what to do with a black man, she weaponized the police. Like, I'm being attacked, called the cops, like had a high-pitched, shrill voice. And that is scary, because the cops then could lead to what happened with George Floyd. And so, right, like that's like when you piece it all together, and it's like being in the situations of people with Amy Cooper when the guy was like a Harvard graduate trying to watch birds in the park, that could somehow very real time lead to what happened to George Floyd, because it was a misunderstanding. Like it wasn't like he got busted in the middle of a drug deal and like the cops just went too far in arresting him. I mean, like he may or may not have been trying to pay with like a forged $20 bill, and like that led to like that. That's crazy.
Right.
And so this woman who's claiming to be attacked and like screaming at the top of her lungs, like, can you imagine the energy the police would have come in with that situation? And so it's real world consequences. And that's what scares me, is that like like you constantly feeling like you're, as a black man, I'll like sum this like long soliloquy up, is that like I spend my whole life, a large majority of my life, trying not to be threatening to white people.
So, man, so like
that's like a loop there on that one.
Well, and let me ask: is that something that, like, I guess how you said your whole life, like, is that something you've consciously always made an effort to do? Like, were you instructed that like that was something that is required of you because you're black, or was it just like an awareness of like what consequences could be?
Yeah, no, it's all the above. Like it is when I was a kid, and I don't even like remember. Like there used to be things where, like in school, you'd get voted on for, I forget, like like it's smartest kid in class, not necessarily smartest kid in class, but I just remember there was something in school which I felt very entirely sure that I should have won, like based on like the credentials of it, and I like was in like middle school at a majority white school, and like I didn't win, like, and I was livid, and my parents were just like, listen, like this is the way the world is. You got to work twice as hard to get half as far being black, because just like everything is seen, everything you do is not seen as valuable. So like that's like lesson number one, that you start to learn. You also start to hear the way the white people around you talk about black people. Like, like they're just like, even like it's on the sly, whether they see something on TV and like they just make an offhand comment about like, oh, like shouldn't have been in the hood, or like, and just the way they see African Americans as threat. And one, it's not necessarily all their fault. Like they're portrayed in the media constantly in a very different and biased way. But and then so you realize though, when you start being really friendly and saying thank you and being super polite, that you like people start liking you. They're like, oh, this is like your world changes. Your perception of when you put on this extra nice attitude, people's perceptions of you change from what then they see other young people. And that's big. It's big. It's informative. You start to view the world. W.E. Du Bois calls it as a double consciousness. Is like, it's not only you see yourself how you see yourself internally, but then you're always trying to see yourself through the view of the majority people, which is white. And so it's like you sort of are playing and try to fit into both those worlds.
Yeah.
And it's exhausting.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. So was it always like a conscious effort? Because here's why I ask, knowing you, I mean, you're one of the funnest people to be around. You're nice. It just seems like you're naturally nice, polite, very charismatic. Like, to me, it would appear as though it's like, dude, this is just Glenn. You want to have a good time? Like, bring Glenn around. We're going to have a great time. Like, any crowd, doesn't matter. But I don't know, man. Like, is that not necessarily the case? Does it depend upon the environment that you're in? Like,
no, so I would say I would say a lot of that I think is like, I like being nice and polite. Everyone should be nice and super polite. And so around friends, it's definitely not that at all. But it's just that sort of heightened, very self-aware of like how I'm looking, how I'm dressing when you're in predominantly white spaces, and like what you're talking about, and like learning about things that like you don't necessarily have an interest in, but it's just like, you gotta like to fit in with like the culture of where you're at. And, that stuff, that part of it is knowing, how people see you. So I'll give you a concrete example. So we're not talking about like an abstract. I remember freshman year of college, walked into French class first day. I was with right next to a teammate of ours, Matt Ransom. We're both wearing regular clothes, nothing athlete wise. We were just like sitting there in class. And I remember the first day, the teacher goes, he's in his spiel, and he looks directly at me. He's like, if you ever have to miss class for a sporting event, it's no problem. Just let me know a week in advance. And nowhere did I ever say like I was there playing. Like it was just like he had just come with a decision that I'm here in his class because I am an athlete. You know, it happened to be true. Like I was an athlete, but like my teammate sitting right next to me, like he didn't look at him. He didn't say the same thing to him. He didn't ask anyone who's an athlete in the class because like I actually think, if I'm not mistaken, Lauren Watley was in that class, like a female soccer player. You know, like. And stuff like that is just so infuriating because it was like in his mind, I'm here for that reason. And like that's this kind of stuff though, like sticks with you and it bothers you because then it's like, does everyone now think I only belong here because I play a sport?
Right.
And that level of always having to question, you know, what does everyone else think about me is tough, which I don't think most people, like I don't think if we were talking about your life experience that like you probably felt that from like as long as you could remember.
Yeah. Well, and you know, and this is like the hard part about the conversation, right? Because like if we were normally having a conversation about anything else besides race, I'd feel totally fine jumping in and saying, "Oh, I have a shared experience," or you know what, that reminds me of how I felt in certain situations, right? Yeah. But it's like during this time, you know, I want to be so sensitive to the fact that like I can't relate. And I'm not saying that in like a pandering way of like, but like I really mean it. Like, you know, I was talking about with Sonia. It's like, you know, we can try and make sense of this all we want. The fact of the matter is like we don't have the experience. We don't understand what it was like. And that's why I think this conversation is so important. So like I can relate to being in situations where I feel uncomfortable or like feeling out of my depth and having to act a certain way. Anyone who knows me when I showed up at college, I mean, I was probably wearing flannel. My hair was probably like, you know, if not yet down to my shoulders, it was on its way there. And I definitely didn't look like I belonged in that environment. But like, in no way does that relate to, you know, like what you're describing. Like there was very little on the line from that perception. You know what I mean?
Actually, I sort of want to disagree a little bit. I think that feeling is the exact same feeling, but the difference is like that's my entire life, right? Yeah. Like you can relate, like you definitely can relate. That's the exact same feeling of being out of place, being like what are people thinking about me? How am I being viewed? Like that feeling that you got initially when you showed up, and like definitely when you walk into a new job, like in a new situation, like I'm not saying you don't ever get that feeling of being judged or like seeing it. But what it is though is that like it's selective situations where you can choose and it gets turned off frequently. Right. And I'm saying it's like it almost never gets turned off for me. And the thing about it too is that it's not even sort of just a subjective feeling. So, you know, there's Brian Williams, I think, there's a lot of people who've done the study on ambulatory blood pressure, right? And so like they basically had people, young men, I think that in the study, white and black men wear blood pressure cuffs and like checking their blood pressure throughout the day. And so there's two things about it, like in levels of times where they felt perceived discrimination, blood pressure in the African-American participants went up across the board. Two, though, even when the blood pressures were like similarly high during the day because you're active, you're up, at night when they were sleeping, African Americans' blood pressures did not drop as much as the white participants. Is that, and you know, how scientists explain this is that they're at such a heightened state of like this, of being judged in preparation of thinking about like what's going to happen, how am I being viewed, what I'm going to do, is that their body just stays in that fight or flight response longer. And so then this stuff like that just shows leads to higher rates of hypertension. You know, it leads to bad cardiovascular disease, not to mention like rates of obesity. And so then like I'll just really kind of tie this in. And then so then when you see people who are like, oh, well, like African Americans are dying disproportionately higher of COVID, and then you hear people say, well, like, yeah, but that's because they have all these pre-existing conditions that are more But then you got to be like, well, why do they have pre-existing conditions that are more?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to like really delve into that, like, because there's nothing. Yeah, there's just nothing inherent. It's not because you're Black that like you're at a higher rate. And to really use this sociology degree, so my senior thesis was on, like I said, race-based health disparities, and my whole project was looking at first generation immigrants to this country. So like, for example, my parents, born and raised in Cameroon, West Africa, came over here for college. So people like that, the study showed, when they first get to this country, they have equivalent health outcomes to white Americans. But it shows within one generation, so me, all that health advantage that I have is gone. I now have the equivalent health outcomes to African Americans who've been in this country like forever. And really? so then you have to be like, well, it's definitely not genetic then, right? There's something out, there's something about being in America that affects Black people differently than affects white people. And so, so then they get more pre-existing conditions, they have more problems. And like, then they suffer when COVID comes around, they suffer more. But it's not something like, oh, like just throw up our hands. Like that's just the way it is. It's like, we got to fix the underlying causes here.
Yeah. So, man, there's so many things to talk about. And I mean, I almost want to circle back. It's like with everything that's gone on with George Floyd, right? I mean, that has dominated, I think, like, the consciousness of America for the last week. And rightly so, in my opinion. Like it's so tragic. It's so shocking. And, you made reference to it. Like, it wasn't just like the act that occurred that was so horrendous. It was like the way in which it occurred and the look on his face and the lack of emotion and just all these like things that I feel like make it just so painful. The fact that like that previous issue with the woman in the park, the fact that like that right now is also what's keeping you up at night, I think says a lot, right? And I heard it said today, like that woman knew how to like weaponize that man's, I don't know what the right way to say. I don't even know the right way to say it is. Like, the fact that he was Black, like she knew how to weaponize that on the phone. And to your point, she was someone who was progressive, right? So it's I don't know, man. My head just keeps getting in a pretzel. It's like, have you thought at all, or have you tried to have discussions with like people? Like, how do you even begin to combat that? Or, like, what do you hope to like come from this that could hopefully start to like change some of these like implicit biases and the way that people are like interacting with each other?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the main thing is two things. So I hope now it is,
and not to put you on the spot is like, how do we solve this? Because it's rooted in hundreds of years of
yeah. But I think though, like the thing that's like made me so happy about this is that the want now, or the interest now in a lot of white people of just getting educated on the problem. Like so many people are like, oh, like what are these resources? Like what like can we read to sort of understand like what's going on, what's behind it? Like, I think you look at like Amazon's best seller book all this week and last has been like these two books, White Fragility and How to Be an Anti-Racist. And it's sort of looking at racism in this country, and like white fragility is all about why it's so difficult for white people to talk about race. And like those, and it's just to learn more about the problem. And I think, so what I've always felt that one of the issues is, and especially when people want to talk about like white privilege, and the reason, so many people are like, they just get turned off by the idea is because like people think those terms mean that the white people firm like didn't work hard to get where they are. Like, right. Like I think when people, there's plenty of people in their jobs who work super hard to get there, and they feel like they grinded for everything that they got. They barely got it. You know, they remember all the times they were downtrodden, and like they made it to where they are, and they're like, I've earned this. And here Black people are saying like, it's privilege, like it was handed to me. And like, that's not like, and that's not what the majority in its best form, when people are really talking about it, no one is saying that. Like, you know, like people are saying, what people are saying is, we had to run a 100-yard dash, and you started on the 40. You didn't ask to start on the 40. You didn't leave early, but you just got to start on the 40-yard line. And so when you win, or when you're ahead, like, you can't be like, oh, it's because I worked really hard and like I practiced and ran my sprint and I'm fast. It's like, well, yeah, and you started 40 yards ahead. And like, just acknowledging that is what, like, which makes it hard for people to do, because, you know, like, they don't see it. But like, when you look at it, like when you look at all the studies in this country, like, so like there's a very jarring study where they looked at, they sent in applications, the exact same job applications to jobs. Yeah, you might remember this from class in college, where the only thing different was the name. And one was like a clearly Black name, like Jamal, or something very stereotypically Black. Right. And the white applicants got called back at 4 times the rate of the Black applicants with the exact same application. So much so that they even put the white applicant with a criminal record, and they still got called back than the Black applicant with the same record with the same application with no criminal record. And that's crazy. And so, right, like, if you like, so like, that was just a study, but imagine in real life, right? You get called back, you get the job, you work really hard, you advance in that job. And then the Black guy who never even got called back is like, well, like, listen, I couldn't get a job. And you're like, well, like, I worked real hard. Like, I put in a bunch of applications. I got called back. Like, I interviewed. I did. Like, you know, like, you don't feel like anything was given to you. But like no one's saying it's your fault. But like, the situation was like, we're the exact same applicant, and you were 4 times likely to get a call back. And so you have to acknowledge that, like, there's reasons why like those people are left behind. And so I think now what's been heartening about this conversation, and it's hard to know with social media, if you're just like in your own silo, because you're just listening and seeing posts of their friends who think like you. But it seems broad that like people are starting to like accept that this idea is real and wanting to learn more about it, which is different. And so like that's the part that like makes me a little bit hopeful that when people start thinking about these issues, then they're not going to be against trying to think about ways to counterbalance them. I think people will be more open to them if they like can start acknowledging that this problem is real.
Yeah. And I mean, that's such a good point. And you said something earlier, you know, the fact that your parents basically told you like, you're going to have to work twice as hard to get half as far, you know, like, I just have to imagine like mentally that's exhausting, you know, just again, in situations where I felt like I was slighted or I was not getting recognized for putting in the work, like, it's really frustrating. You know what I mean? And I think, you know, like what I'm hearing is like to feel like that, not only like to carry that weight, but that's an expectation. I mean, I hope I'm not putting words in your mouth. Like that's got to wear on you.
Oh, 100%. It's exhausting is the right word. And like to compound it, to like really just add to it. And it's then when you do succeed and get places, right? And then to have people think like, well, like, oh, you were there because you're Black, and like you're the diversity hire, and like so like that even compounds it, right? Like, so you're like working super hard, and like you work twice as hard and you get places, and then like you hear people say it, and then you start to think it like, man, like did I like deserve this, or like is that the reason like they picked me out like of this thing? And like to even like, so like to think about it, even in your success, like you doubt, and that, and like all of that is very, very tiring, and it's exhausting, and it's problematic.
So, and that's a good segue too, because, you know, to fast forward people a little bit, like you have achieved quite a lot at a very young age, right? You got into a fantastic med school after Princeton. You're now at the University of Michigan, right? And you're in your residency, and then you were just published, and I'm totally going to butcher it because I don't have my notes in front of me. But you were just published, like you were just on CNN. So like you really are a shining example, not of just like a black man who can succeed in America. You're an example of like a young man who can accomplish incredible things through hard work. And I have the benefit of knowing you, and I lived with you senior year. And I saw the amount of work that it took for you to pull all those things off. There were days while we were out sitting around drinking in the quad, and you're 6 floors under Firestone putting in work on your senior thesis. You know what I mean? Like, so I've seen it. I guess, in my mind watching that, I was like, well, dude, Glenn's just a hard worker, I never at any point, I guess, did race factor in to my assumption as to like why you were putting in such a high degree of work. But like, did that factor in your mind at that time? Or was this, again, just, to some extent, you're also just wired in that way? Like,
yeah.
Did that play any role or?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I don't like, when you're doing it, there plays a little bit of a role in the extent of where, like, when you're worried about if you fail, that like you are fulfilling all those people's stereotypes and ideas who didn't think you belonged in the first place, that you're just like making that come true. So like a little bit of that plays into it, of like not wanting to sort of fail at it, like, and working hard to get it done. And I sort of too, I think one of the best things that going to Princeton with you has got me to see the world is that, like, I no longer, for the most part, I would say, and this may or may not actually be true, but like what I tell myself is like, I no longer care if people think I deserve what I get, right? Because we've been in an institution like one of the best in the country, and we know there's a ton of people there that don't deserve to be there. Like, we know people who get in there because like their parents donated, and like they are not the best and brightest of like the world has to offer. And like, we know that they get jobs after based on nothing that they had to do. And so like, I have seen with my own 2 eyes many a time over that a ton of people who are where they are now aren't there because they quote unquote deserved it. Like, they had lots and lots of help. And so like now it's like, I don't care if you hired me because like you needed a black guy, like I'm going to go kill this job and make the most out of it, because like that's the way it works. Yeah. And so I think that part was like the greatest life lesson that I lost that little bit of chip on, like, once I get something, of like really caring like how other people perceive if I deserve it. But like there is this thing of like not wanting to fail, like no one wants to fail, but like there's this other element where I feel responsible for representing Black people, and when I do some things.
Yeah. I could understand that, just from a perspective of like, you want to be a good representation of your community, like on like what you often see is like people love to rep their hometown. It's like a much exaggerated version of that. And that like, you are a Black man in America who's made it really far. It's like, I guess, you want to like show like that, hey, like, not only am I as an individual, like, do I deserve to be here? And like, I'm among the best, but like, I want to be a shining example of like what other Black men in America are capable of. Like, I hope I'm not like overstepping and putting more on you than what you're trying to say, but.
Yeah. And it's true. And it's like, I can't remember who said this, but when I heard it, but like, what we want too is like, for very like we like equality is the day where like very mediocre Black people get far in life. Like you know what I'm saying? Like all like you think about like, I don't get, but like to get the people in positions of power who are African American, like you read all their CVs and it's impressive. Like,
Yeah.
like they went to all the top places and like they somehow went. And like that's not necessarily the same when you like read some of these other people. And like you just
Mhm.
like you even think about like just like we like sports, right? You think about like NFL coaching hires, right? Like how many like mediocre white coaches keep getting jobs, like
Yeah.
like that have shown nothing on their resume, but like it's like black coaches have to be so great at everything and they don't get a bunch of second or third chances. Like Charlie Strong for a while was like a big name in college football. Like dude can't get a major job anymore.
Mhm.
And like lots and lots of stuff, but like other people just keep getting jobs. Like, and so it's just like it's stuff like that that you sort of want, that the ability to not have to be twice as good to get just the same job. You just want, like, you wish you could just be just normally as good and get the same job.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you heard of the Warren Harding effect?
Sounds
So,
familiar.
so I was a history major, and I mean, it's kind of what you were describing. I think by all like measures of what a good president is, he was painfully average, mediocre. Some would probably describe it as worse. But basically, like he rose to prominence because I mean he looked the part. He was like very senatorial, I think is the word.
Yeah.
Like tall, white, handsome, just looked like a leader. And because of that, like it just kind of like inexplicably, he just like kind of rose to prominence and people rallied around him. And he just kind of like dumbfoundedly found himself becoming president of the United States. And that's like an extreme example. And it's really interesting if you go back and read about it. But yeah.
No, I hear you. Like, did you see I don't know if you saw that Theranos documentary with like Elizabeth Holmes?
Oh, I
Like,
haven't seen it yet.
dude, this lady is like at Stanford and she has like this crazy idea about like running, basically taking one drop of blood and running like a million different labs on it. And like
Hmm.
the idea is asinine. It just doesn't work. Like it's just, it legitimately just doesn't work. And like, but like she's just like power of persona. She like looks the part. She has a bunch of fancy friends. Like
Yeah.
none of the science is working, but people are still like prominent people are still giving her a ton of money. And you're just like, she like the documentary is just very clear. She has nothing backing her, but like she just pitches it well. Looks like she knows what she's talking about. Has some degrees, and you're just like, man, like just the power of persona can just really kind of get you places
Yeah.
if you're white. If you and like but that's the thing, like
Yeah.
what it looks like, that person, the person you expect to look, that looks presidential or whatever,
Mhm.
senatorial, is definitely like a white dude or a white woman, and maybe but mainly a white dude.
Yeah. No, yeah, you're right, man. And it's funny, and I almost let this go by, but like this idea of white privilege, it is uncomfortable because to your point, right? What it might sound like on the surface level is like, hey, you were handed this. And on the other side, the white person's like, no, I worked really hard. So that like, there's some cognitive dissonance around like being okay with that. And what I've been trying to wrap my head around is like, okay, objectively looking back, I think there's pretty clear evidence that black people have been held down, right? You can look at literal segregation. You can look at, I mean, to go back as far as slavery, which I still like clearly echoes through like our current environment today in terms of like the cause and effect of everything from like socioeconomic outcomes for people, where they live, how they live. But it's like, okay, so what happens when we accept white privilege? Like as a white person, like, dude, I care. Like, I really care a lot. And I feel guilt in that. I'm like, man, have I not been doing enough? The answer is probably no, because I haven't had to, right? So it's like, what do you feel, or I guess like, of people within the black community who like you feel are like really being conscientious about this? Like, what do you feel like the desired outcome is from that,
Yeah. So That's great. So the acknowledgement it goes so long, just of acknowledging that it's a little bit tougher. So one, it helps when you're evaluating if you now are in a hiring position and you're evaluating applicants, right? And you're looking at them, and then you're seeing differences in applications. You're like, well, like all things being equal, this candidate's CV is a little bit better, but like all things aren't equal, right? Like this person, you can start to factor in like this person has overcome so much to even get close to this. Like maybe there's something about that like I'd want them. Like they might not necessarily like their GPA might not be the thing, like their standardized test score might not be as high, but like the fact that they overcame so much of institutionalized racism to even get to a point where they got a fighting chance, like maybe I'll take them. But then that's one thing. Then there's another thing too, is then when people start talking about policies to address some of these differences, like in like how we appropriate money to our schools, like how voting rights and gerrymandering, then you start being like, okay, like, all right, like we really do gotta readdress this thing, right? Because like schools are funded based on property taxes. Property taxes are based on like how expensive the house you live. But like who gets access to live in these wealthy communities? Knowing that like even Black people, even with the same credit score at banks, aren't given the same rates for loans. And so like when you start to see that, it's like, well, okay, like maybe we gotta adjust. Maybe now we got to adjust how we give money to schools, and we think about it. Like, we got to redistrict things going around because it's just not fair because the policies we put in place aren't fair. And so then like we start thinking about that, and like you get people talking about different plans, like then you start to being open to the idea, and then you start to vote, and you start to think some of these changes in the society that we got to make up for some of the institutionalized damage that we've done. We got to fix it. And so I think that's it. I mean, I don't think it means like, oh, like I give my job away to a Black guy because like I had white privilege. Like no one's like saying that, but it's just like recognizing like when you're hiring people, like maybe the hiring committee shouldn't be 4 white dudes. Like maybe we should have a diverse perspective on figuring out who gets to work at our company.
Yeah.
Like maybe when I go look at a school for my kid, one of the questions I'm asking is like, what's the racial breakdown? And if there's no Black people here, like, let's ask some questions like, why not? And like, what are we doing about it to change it? And like, that's tough. Like, that's tough to do. But it's like, it's just thinking about it and holding people accountable to it.
Yeah. And you said this as well, like for me, I'm well educated, or they sure tried their best. And, and like, I'm fortunate in that I feel like I do have a diverse group of friends, people that I care a whole heck of a lot about. And I'm embarrassed in that, like, in some ways, I don't even have like the vernacular to like discuss this articulately. You know what I mean? Like, I gotta be honest, man. Like, it was really important to me that we had this conversation, but then like, I was starting to get nervous. I was like, man, I didn't realize how uneducated I am on the topic.
Yeah.
And so one thing, and now I'm speaking from my own perspective, is it's certainly raising awareness, and it's causing some action. And I know it's not, just for me and my group, because I've had a lot of conversations about this with people within my inner circles, who normally this would never come up. It would never be on the docket, right? But like the conversation's happening from like a white man's perspective. It's now trying to come to terms with like, all right, well, how do I help in a way that's not just like showing face? Like I think, and I'd be interested to get your opinion on this too. Social media has been really interesting this week. People trying to show support. I think well-intended trying to show solidarity. And I know some of the execution of like Blackout Tuesday didn't work the way that maybe people hoped it would, because it blocks some people from getting some good content. But like, I don't even know what the right question is. It's like, are you feeling, and do you feel like members in the Black community are feeling like there is like a genuine upswell of support from like other races, and knowing that white Americans make up 75% of this country? Like, does it really feel like there is a genuine upswell of support that maybe wasn't there in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I think
it's still too soon to tell.
It's definitely too soon to tell if it's sustained. I mean, I would say definitely in the last week, there's no one who could say that there's not been a genuine, diverse group of people who have cared about this issue. Like when you go like to protest, like, there's protests out in South Dakota. How many Black people are out in South Dakota? Like, so like whoever's protesting isn't like, it's not a bunch of Black people out there. But, but like, you know what I'm saying? But like, you look on TV, you look at like any of these rallies and protests, it's people of all kinds of different races in a way that wasn't before. And I think too, but the problem is it's hard to know, and right now we're in it, if it's sustained. It feels different. It definitely it's unlike anything that like I've experienced in my lifetime. I mean, you have people posting like all the Black businesses, all the Black owned restaurants in like their neighborhood, and being like, hey, like you gotta go support this by like eating there or like buying from like their stores. Like that's the stuff that makes a huge difference. Like when you support that economy there, you're putting your money there is a big deal, because like that's how people like rise and gain wealth and accumulate all that stuff. And so yeah, we'll see. I mean, we'll see like 2 months from now, 3 months from now, like if people have just sort of forgotten it, like there's the next thing that people have moved on to. I'm hopeful though. I'm hopeful because I think so much, like the reason I'm hopeful is because so much of, at least of what I'm seeing, and again, I don't know if this is my own echo chamber, is that people want the education on like the problem. Like people want to learn and read about it. It's not just, hey, donate $20 to the Minnesota bailout fund. Like that is definitely part of it. Like people are definitely donating money to like distinct causes, bailing out protesters, which is fine. But so much of it is like, here are some resources to read about this problem. And I think that's what really changes, is like if you sit down and you read a whole book, like if you read like White Fragility or How to Be an Anti-Racist, then you do have the vernacular, and you have like enough to have a conversation, and like you could start having a deeper level of conversation because you're coming from the same sort of background, knowledge, and experience. And I think that's what's been heartening, is that people don't want just the quick, like, let me black on my Instagram thing. And like I appreciate that for sure. But like I also appreciate being like, here's some things to read, here's some articles to read, here's some information. And I think if people do their due diligence by reading and digesting that, and then we'll probably talk about this later, but then like talking to their children about it, I think is like the biggest thing that for me that's been so important, is that not trying to sort of protect your kids but like what's going on. Like this is a big thing in like their life. And like you said, like this is going to be in the history books. And I like guarantee you, like, when your kids are in college or high school, like they're going to study this year for the dumpster fire it is. But then like they're going to come ask you questions, like because how like kids, you get super righteous when you get like that, you get a little bit of knowledge, you start thinking like you understand the world, and you're going to be like, yo, what were you doing when everyone else was like protesting and making change? Like what side of history were you on? Like same thing with like even like little things like gay rights too. Like I've seen my parents evolve on that issue of gay rights, like, and because it's messed up. Like, can you like now, can you seriously say like, oh yeah, like gay people shouldn't be able to get married? That sounds ridiculous. But like, yo, like even 10 years ago, like that was not an uncommon thought about like our parents' generation. Like, like I distinctly, and like I don't really want to blow up my dad here, like he's a great guy, but like I distinctly remember there was like a kissing scene on TV, and they were like, two men were making out, and my dad was like, I can't believe they show this on TV. And I'm just like, and I'm like, what? like that is like, but like the other day, he was like, he just like, what did he was talking about maybe taking my little nephew to like the Pride thing. He was like, wanted to know if he thought it'd be safe And like, I'm just like, that is such a
huge evolution.
So people can evolve, and like, and so that, like, stuff like that kind of gives me hope. And like, I really, I mean, obviously, like, racism has been going on for a long time and people haven't changed yet, but like, I don't know, maybe this is like a big step in the right direction.
Yeah. And I've been thinking about this a lot, and I feel like the reason that all of this has my head just in such a pretzel, it's like, so I really try to be objective. I really try and like take a step back, take the emotion out of it, and like the way I approach most things in life, right? And I think what we're seeing, and you already said this, like almost unanimously, there is no one in the country who defends the actions of that police officer, right? Like unanimously, it's like, dude, charge that guy now. Like, just the thing we're arguing about is like, how quick can you get it done? Like, it's taken too long, basically. And I don't think there's anyone fighting on that, right? So it's like, okay, what are we really fighting about here? So it's like, okay, police brutality for sure. The way the police have like interacted with like African Americans and specifically like black males, right? Like, it needs to change. And I don't think anyone is like really pushing back on that, at least anyone who's being like thoughtful about it, you know? And so those feel like all things that we can rally behind. But what's so hard is it's like the real underlying issue of like racism, and like, how do we finally like stamp this out? You know, and it just feels like such an invisible enemy that's so difficult to like take down. You know, I just keep being like, man, like how do I actually make a change? And I don't have a good answer. You know, I think, like, to your point, like trying to get educated, trying to have thoughtful conversations with people. But you also said it, like, dude, it's been around a really long time.
Yeah.
You know, like, how do we make it stick? And I don't know. I don't know. And maybe we start talking. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no. I mean, but like, so some of it too, like, though, I really, really think, man, a lot of it. Some people would disagree with it though, but I think a lot of it's exposure. I mean, I think is like, we are so segregated. Like, our schools now, Nicole Hannah Jones from like the New York Times does this great piece on this, but like, our schools now are more segregated than when Brown versus Board of Education was passed. Like, it is more segregated now than it was like when like the laws were passed for it. And like, we just genuinely don't interact enough with people of other races in meaningful context, like in like every day to day, like, you're going to school together, you're working together, you're living next to each other. Like, like, I mean, yes, you see black people, like, you like go out in the world, and like, but like, I'm talking about like in a meaningful, like, grow up together, like, you come hang out at my house, sort of, when we're kids, like that. And that doesn't happen because kids don't go to school together. Like, that's just like the end stop. Like, they don't go to school together. And so like, they don't get this genuine interaction where they like get to know each other's families and get to know them at a deeper level. And so like, they form their opinions on other groups from like what they see on TV, what they hear, which isn't always like very flattering. And so I think to me, that's like what I find the biggest thing. And it's just representation. It's like making sure that the proportion of people in society match the proportion of people where you live around. And it's so hard. And too, as like a black man myself, I struggle with this when I think about my wife. We struggle with this when we think about what we want, like where we want to live and where we want to put our daughter in school. It's like, do you go to quote unquote like the best schools in like the all white neighborhoods because that gives her the best advantage, or like, do you like keep her somewhere where she's going to be exposed to a diverse group of people, and it might not necessarily be like the best school, like what's more important? And so, I mean, it's hard. We like, she's 11 months. So God, we have so long to figure it out. But like, you can tell it weighs on our minds as we talk about this, like even now. But like,
Yeah.
these are the things that like you start to have to think about what's important to you, like what you're exposing your children to.
Yeah, I know. And that's been the hard part of this too is, and you and I caught up a little bit yesterday about this, but looking back at like big, like historical events, um, I think we both do this. Like I put myself back there. I'm like, well, how would I have reacted? I know how I like would want to have acted. I know how I think I would have. But when push came to shove, like when it was going against the grain of society or whatever, it's like, would you have just been complicit? Even just being complicit by like not taking any action. And for me, I sense that we're in like a big historical moment. I sure hope we are, right? I mean, clearly, like what's happening across the country in terms of like our cities on fire and like, just like the massive spread of protest and unfortunately subsequent riots. And maybe we can talk about that too. Like it feels like something really big is happening. And everyone in the world now, even with a pandemic as the backdrop, is like focused on this issue. And I was like, well, shit, I'm in it. What am I going to do? Like, am I just going to sit here and maybe like post enough on social media so people like don't think I'm racist by not participating? Or like, am I going to try and find a way to like at least be a part of the conversation? And like, I'm very fortunate in that I already had a podcast, so I have some sort of platform at least to like engage in dialogue. But like that was a driver, but like having kids, I really was like, well, what are my kids going to think? When they look back and to your point, because they are going to come back, they're going to ask what 2020 was like, what am I going to have to say? Be like, yeah, there was a massive change. And I just kind of like hoped it worked out.
I was pulling for the good guys, but like it just happened.
Yeah. Like I agreed with it, but I don't know. I didn't really want to stick my neck out there, and I got a pretty good thing going. And it kind of would have made me feel a little weird around some of the groups I run in. And I just, I didn't want to talk about it. That's a huge driver for being like, no, man, I want to be present in this thing. And then present can mean lots of different things. Like I have a podcast, so this made a lot of sense. Like, dude, let's try and have a conversation, give people some perspective that maybe they didn't have access to your point, because like shit, we're segregating ourselves. Like, so I guess what I want to throw to you is you've already lived your life up to this point, dealing with a lot of this prejudice and having to operate within this environment. But like, how is having a daughter now maybe like reshaped your perspective?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's now given me a sense of urgency that this has to change, right? I sort of like, I've sort of made my peace with like, I will live my life, the remainder of my life, with this double consciousness. I will like probably forever have this interaction with the majority of society where I'm always feeling like I gotta put on a performance in order not to be judged. I feel like my interactions with the police, for the most part, will always be like, there will be always a part of me that's on a heightened sense of awareness for like what's going down.
Yeah.
Like, I've accepted that, like 30 years old, probably gonna be like that way the rest of my life. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
But it's been like, like I can't have my daughter at 30 feeling the exact same things. Like she can't feel this same stress and this same burden to impress like people around, because like that's just not right. Like, like you see her and she is so happy, so innocent, like, and it's just like, we gotta fix this thing, and like, and the thing is, because it's the same, man, it's the same. In that, like the same things that like I want for my kids, the same thing everyone wants for their kids, to have the best opportunity in this world. And I just want her to feel safe and loved. And so like that sort of made me be like, okay, well, like let's have these conversations. Like let's go into these spaces and talk to these people about this problem. Like, I'm a surgery resident, so I talked to my entire department, like had this big sort of similar conversation we're having now in front of all these like people of power who are traditional, and a lot of them are older white men who grew up in a different way, but like let's have like a tough conversation. And then it's like, let's like let's get on this podcast and let's talk to you, and like let's have like interesting conversations, like how do you feel in terms of like your workplace, your other job, like like
Yeah.
what's the diversity there, like what's the impact, is there a opportunity to be like, hey, like what's our hiring practices, like what are we looking, I mean, it might look great already, like I have no idea, but it's just sort of being thinking about it and being thoughtful and forcing people to be thoughtful. And then like the other thing, which we sort of talked about too, like with the families, like everyone has like that
Mm.
relative that says something problematic from time to time, like like I got it in my family will say something about like, and it's just like like you sort of just bat your eye, like you let it go. And I'm not saying necessarily you got to fight every battle, but like now I know though, like I mean, Kennedy can't speak, honestly, she says one word, but like one day though, when that happens and she's around, like even if I don't like talk about it with my family member, I like gotta talk about it with her, like, yo, that is not okay. Like
Yeah.
we just like, she's senile, so we let it go when grandma says it, but like I just want you to know that no one thinks that is okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, it's interesting because I grew up north of Seattle, and like, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that like Seattle's, well, maybe it's not as diverse as it used to be, but it's at least like a pretty progressive city, right?
Yeah.
It's on the West Coast. It doesn't have a lot of like the historical baggage that other parts of the country have. And I grew up in like a great place to grow up, nice suburb, but kind of like a rural area. And, I felt for the most part, like everyone had the perspective of like all people are created equal, and like we didn't have a ton of black kids in our school, but like we did interact with like kids at other towns, and I don't know, it was just never an issue. And then as I got older, I did realize like, nah, there's racism here. And in a weird way, it was like, well, man, how much are you willing to stand up for? And what I found was, to someone that I had no attachment to, it was a lot easier to be like, yo, don't say that stuff around me. Like that's not cool. Cut that shit out. Right. As you get closer to someone, it does get a lot harder to make that correction. Right.
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, it's like sometimes like you don't want the fight, which is now it feels like laziness, and it feels like taking the easy way out, especially like with everything that's going on. You look back and you're like, oh man, like I missed an opportunity to do what was right. And I actually feel like some shame over that. And it's like, yeah, to your point, it's like how many times just for the sake of just like letting something go to not have a confrontation that's uncomfortable, have you just let something slide? I think about it a lot with my kids all the time. It's like, what sort of example do I want to set in every facet of my life? And I think I was talking with my brother about this, like the best thing, because he's he's a fun guy, but he's a little more, I don't know if shy is the right word, but he's not like outspoken with his beliefs. Like he's never going to post anything political. He's just not that kind of guy. And he's like, my take on all this is like, I just want to lead by example at home. Like I want my kid to know what's right. The people I interact with, I want them to know where I stand based on my actions, how I treat people, how I interact with people. And I was like, I get that. That's great. And so like, I certainly want to do that at home with my kids. What I imagine will be harder in the future is when you do interact with people who maybe make a comment, even after kind of all this goes on, it's like, I will really feel responsibility to say something. Not that I didn't before, but now it's like, nah, man, you're giving up little inches of ground that are like stopping everyone from moving forward. Like by letting those like little comments, go unaddressed, I'm just, by being complicit, allowing this racism to kind of just continue to exist.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't know. It's gonna be
But that's also an example too, though, too, right? Like,
mm,
like by not saying anything, although like like might not participate, not agree, but what message is that too? Like
right,
you're like,
right.
it's sort of okay to say it in like around, like I don't know. I honestly really don't know. And it's tough. I mean, it's tough. It's tough but you got like, no, I don't have the right answer. I like on it, but I just do know though, like kids, eh, you could talk to them about more than like you originally thought. Like they pick up on more than you think.
Mm.
Like that's what I've learned, even like from a young age.
Oh
Like
God,
they're
yeah.
like they like definitely pick up on more than you think, and so you can start treating them in a little bit of way of like race isn't something that like that they that's not something they deal with now. Like I think my kids don't get the luxury of waiting until they're in college to like fully
Hmm.
discover racism and how to deal with it, like when they're mature high school people. Like they get
Yeah.
like they're in it from like day one. So like, why can't your kids like learn about it? Like,
Mhm.
and I don't mean you like you
No, no, no.
specifically,
You're
but
calling me out.
but like that's the thing. It's just like the ability to learn about race and racism and not having to experience it is like a true privilege, right?
Yeah.
And so like I feel like that should start super early.
I agree. And just going through this whole process, our oldest daughter, well, our only daughter, but our oldest child is, 5.5. And we were kind of like, man, how do we address this with her? Because the spark that ignited all this is just like, it's so terrible. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
And so like
Yeah.
anytime you communicate anything to a kid, you got to like try and put it in terms that they can like understand and cope with. And kids are capable of a lot more than we give them credit for. But we were like, no, like we need to set the stage now. She needs to be aware of what's going on, at least in terms that she can understand. And she need to understand that like there is a right way to handle these things, and there's no place for racism. And what and it was interesting, man. Like trying to explain to her what racism was, you had to break it down in like really simple terms. I think she gets it generally. It'll obviously take time. It's such a complex subject. But like when trying to like break it down to her,
She's
it was
got she's got Sonia's brain in her, so like I think like
really
she might
fine.
be all right. Yeah.
Yeah, man. But it was like trying to explain it. You're just kind of like, fuck, this is so crazy. You know?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like,
But the next time though, it's gonna be a little bit easier when you talk to
yeah,
like Kenny and then you have to talk to Cannon. Like, like you like it just because you have started already, like each time it's going to be a little bit easier.
yeah,
It's gonna be tough. Like I'm like it is not the same thing at all, but like, like delivering bad news when I like had to tell someone like their family member had died, like the first time, man, like it is me rambling for like 30 minutes, not 30 minutes, but like 3 minutes, not trying to get to it. Like, well, like we did a lot of things. He was sick, like the heart stopped, we restarted it. And like, oof, like I know it's tough. Like, and then like now I'm just not that it's easy, but I just realized it's straightforward. They want to hear it. Like whether like me rambling for 30 seconds to try to like save them the bad news a little bit longer doesn't
yeah,
only prolongs it for me and them. But like you just start to get the words like every single time you do it, and like unfortunately it's something that with this COVID thing I had to do more than I would like. But you
yeah,
just start to get a little bit more facile with what to say. It doesn't become easier. The conversation is never easier because it's a tough topic, but the
mm,
words come a little bit easier. Your thoughts form a little bit clearer, and you could get further each time, I think.
yeah. And talking about your profession, like because you're a doctor, right? And you're at the University of Michigan. And I know that you've actually had to like spend a lot of time in Detroit though, right? Given everything that
Yeah.
happened. Like do you still encounter like just just like blunt racism, or is it more you encounter kind of these like tongue-in-cheek slights, so to speak?
Yeah. I would say the majority of the stuff now is like sort of like, oh, like I have been mistaken for the janitor so many times. Like
Really?
that, like, like I just like walk in a room to, like, mind you, a patient who like I operated on yesterday, like I did their surgery. Like, I walk into the room and like they're handing me their food tray because I think like I'm the guy who's cleaning up their food tray, and I'm just like, yeah, no, not me. Like, and it is like, and so now I'm like starting to become like a more senior resident. So like I lead some of the teams in the room, and it's like so funny. Like I'll go with the like intern who's like the first year resident or like a second year resident. I'll go in the room and I will start talking to the patient, telling them the plan, and then they'll be asking the questions to like the first year resident who's like sitting next to me, and I'm just like, because like they look like it's a tall white dude, and like they think that's the guy in charge, and I'm just like, no, like it's me. Yeah. But and so like that's most of it, right? Like I have been fortunate enough, or not unfortunate, like I've never had anyone be like, like I don't want you as my doctor, but it happens though. Like the Michigan call center, they had to give all the operators training because patients would call in and be like, oh, well, like I don't want a black doctor. Like not talking about me specifically, not like they're like a new patient, like I need a doctor for X, Y, and Z. And just like make sure they're not black. And it's like you're like, yo, what?
Yeah.
And so so that it's different. Like, so I know that exists, right? And I know some of these patients are like some of the people I'm taking care of, and like you don't want to make judgments, but like sometimes when like they're running in like with like a Make America Great hat again, and like not that necessarily implies that. But like you just like it gives you pause sometimes when and you're trying to figure out like what this person kind of thinks of you. But most of the time though, like because you're like in such a position of power and you're like the one making the medical decisions, like they don't say anything outwardly. To me, at least, I haven't experienced that.
Yeah. Hey, let me ask you, and how are you doing on time?
Oh yeah, I'm good. I don't know if anyone's still listening to us, but like I'm doing good.
What do you make of all like, because I feel like now I'm gonna like put my own opinion in here a little bit. Like the peaceful protests, it's like awesome. You know what I mean? Like it's unity. It's people like marching for a cause. It's like the spilling over to riots that like is really making me feel some anxiety. It's like, oh shit, man. It's like, it feels like it's detracting potentially. It feels to me like it's detracting from like the positive message that we're trying to send. And it's giving an opportunity to people who want to maintain the status quo, the ability to say like, yep, see, like, you know what I mean? Like, look at the way that all these people are looting and rioting. Like, they're asking for equality, and like, look at the way that they're behaving right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I know that's obviously I'm making that statement because it's like I don't agree with it, but like, what is like your take on like the way that everything is kind of unfolding, like specifically like the rioting and the looting piece of it?
Yeah, it's tough. So, I guess the cleanest answer is like I personally wouldn't riot and loot, but I 100% understand the feeling and the sentiment and the people for the most part who are doing it. I think when you are over policed, you live in housing, don't get access to good jobs. First of all, you don't get access to good education. You don't get access to good healthcare. There's no well-paying jobs in your area. There's extra police attention, and you've been oppressed for so long, and no one is listening to you. and then you get policed and get handcuffed for potentially using a fake $20 bill. A cop murders a guy on camera in live TV, and it takes 4 days for an arrest. Like, that level of anger that can cause is, like, it's something, the feeling of like, what will get your attention? Like, if it takes me burning down everything for you to listen to like what I am saying and let you know, like, this is not okay. Like, I get it. I 100% get the feeling. And so, like, yeah, like, no one like wants to see it burn down. Like, no one wants to see people hurt. Like, people would love like the peaceful protest. But like, I mean, like after Donald Trump was elected, like, people marched on, like, there's the Women's March and there's all those things. And like, so like, it's nice. And it's like, and you think about like what has actually changed, but like, you riot, you start turning stuff up, you start making people uncomfortable, like things like that force, like the guy gets arrested, all the cops get arrested, like, not saying that one led to the other, but it's just like, you start thinking about it, and it's like, what more like, people have been protesting before, like, people have had peaceful protests before, nothing has changed. People, like, Colin Kaepernick tried to take a knee, like, that's a different sort of thing, but like, people have tried to do it in so many different ways, and no one wants to listen. And so, like, yeah, like, then they go rob and loot, because like, it's not about the, I think I posted, James Baldwin said this, it's not about the physical thing that they're looting, like the TV set or whatever it is, like, like, it's inconsequential. The value of that stuff is probably, in the grand scheme of things, it's inconsequential. It's like, people just want to be seen. Like, like, you just like have been ignoring me for so long. Like, you've pushed me to the point where like, this is how I have to get your attention.
Yeah.
And so it's tough. So like I said, like, like, it's not me, it's not the way I want to do it. I think though, the people who use the riots, whose conversation is like, oh, like, it's really bad what the cop did, but the riots are crazy and you have to stop. It's like, well, like, you have the emphasis on the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it should be more of like, the riots and stuff should stop, but police really need to stop killing people unarmed. And like, and so like, I think the riots are a distraction for the people who, in general, the people who want to talk more about the riots than anything else are the people who don't want to actually deal with the issue. And the riots are a convenient excuse for them to say, like, this is actually the real issue. Like, that's not the real issue. Like, the real issue is like, there weren't riots before this video went on and no one got arrested. People aren't rioting every day. So to be like, this is like some systemic problem it's like, no, that's not it. It's like, they're rioting for a reason. Like, you got to fix the reason that they're rioting and not worry about stopping the riots. Because then if all you're focused on is like stopping the riots, then like, wait until like this guy gets off for murder. What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah.
Like,
I feel like, one of the best things that I've learned, I don't know to what extent it's learned or to what extent it's just, like, part of my makeup, but like, consciously taking a step back, whether or not you agree with an action or the way someone's behaving, and trying to understand like what's driving that.
No, you can tell you have kids.
Yeah. You know what? And I've talked about it a little bit on the show, but like, it's a big point of emphasis for me in doing this, and I plan to do more around it. But like, like my dad had mental illness, and like, we didn't ever talk about it for a lot of different reasons, and I never tried to show it, but like, I would just be torn up inside. But people wouldn't know. And so I always had this feeling like, man, you just never know what someone's going through. And that's like one very isolated experience. But like, it's taught me what you're seeing on the surface is largely just a symptom of like some other root cause. And it's probably worth investigating like why that's happening. Yeah. So in watching these riots, I'm right there with you. Like, in a perfect world, no, I don't want that. I definitely don't want to see anyone else hurt. Like, I don't think most people, if you would ask them, like, certainly don't want more violence to beget more violence and more deaths. Like, that's not what anyone wants. But if I take a step back and say, and again, not being able to direct relate, but like, man, if you have had this pent up frustration and you felt like you haven't had a voice and you felt like no one is helping, like, how frustrated and angry must you be? And for that to spill over, I'm like, okay, I can see the cause. Doesn't mean like anyone's condoning it. Um, but it's like to your point, if you focus on just stopping the riots, which I think everyone would agree, like we don't want the riots to continue.
Yeah.
Like we can't lose sight of the bigger issue. It's like, well, what is causing this? Like, what is the actual underlying cause that is causing this symptom to flare up? That's like that's kind of how
100%.
that's kind of how I'm feeling about it. And I wish, like you said, that these previous peaceful actions that have been taken would have been enough to push the needle. And again, in no way like condoning violence. It's like, fuck, man. Sometimes you got to mix shit up for people to listen. And so it'll be really interesting to kind of see what comes out of this.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like it is, I can't imagine because, fortunately, the direction my life has taken, it's been great. I've been very fortunate. And so, but like, I definitely know of people who like live like below poverty line, like how tough it is and how like they just feel like they can't catch a break. They feel like the system is against them. And in a lot of ways, like they're 100% right. Like it really is. Like, I mean, seriously, you think like this, I mean, don't want to get too controversial, but like you think of the amount, like studies have shown like the amount of drug use in white communities is equivalent to like poor minority communities. It's just looked at differently. It's looked at like, oh, it's recreational, like they do it to have fun. Like, I mean, like we went to college, like if you had DEA agents like coming in to Princeton every week, like people would be in a lot of trouble. Like that's the thing. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
and honestly, like it, like I'll say the same thing. Like I've had it like in med school, and so like it's the same sort of thing. And it is like, but because you're in a sphere that is sort of protected where it's like people look the other way or like they don't ask too many questions, like it's fine. Like, the laws around it haven't changed. But like, yeah, like if you over police, you put a bunch of people in a low income neighborhood and then like a bunch of police in a low income neighborhood and they go searching for stuff, like, yeah, they're going to find more criminal activity. But like for some reason, when it's like a 16-year-old Black kid in a poor neighborhood, it's not like experimenting, a kid blowing off steam or just having fun or like growing pains. It's, criminal behavior that needs serious jail time. But like, you get caught in college, you get a little citation for, like dorm misconduct. Cause like, it's just seen, like the behavior, the same exact behavior is just seen in a different lens.
Yeah.
And so if you live in that world where you know that like you're at that disadvantage, and then now you get a breaking point where you're just like, no one is listening, no one is caring about my plight. Like this is how, and this is a small group of people, and like I don't really think that like the riots, I hate that the riots are overshadowing like, for some people, like the actual message of what's going on. So like, I'm not like sitting here like let's riot and burn everything down.
Yeah.
But like, I'm also just not like, I'm not going to be out there condemning it, being like, oh, like, let's like, we gotta get all these riots to stop. I'm like, no, we gotta get the police killings to stop. And then I think the riots are going to fix themselves.
Yeah. It's so much to unpack is how I feel, and it's just so complicated because there's just so many issues to try and like take a run at,
Yeah.
And from like a white person's perspective, it's the way I can speak to it, it's not lack of caring, it's lack of necessity to act. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, I think we all can relate. Like, life is just difficult for everyone, right?
Yeah.
Like, no, like your problems might be small in comparison to someone else's. Um, but like in your world, like it feels big, and sometimes you're just trying to get through the day. So, unless you have like a real external catalyst to like get you to take action, a lot of times like you're just not going to do it. And I feel like we now have a big external catalyst that is causing people like me and other people to like wake up, like it's like, oh shit, like, no, we need to address this. And like, I need to stop being a bystander. Because my lack of action it's almost kind of like we were saying earlier, by not correcting someone when they step out of line and say something, it's you almost in a way, you're like giving it a little bit of like credence, like,
Yeah.
and so it's like by kind of passively just letting this continue, you're like, no, it's okay. It's not that bad. Someone else will solve it. Like, I don't know, man. It's really, I feel like making folks like myself, like be like, nah, dude, we gotta finally like raise our voice, step up and do something.
Yeah. And so that, like, again, in a perfect world, that's this moment, right? Like that's this moment that's a turning point, that there's enough people who feel this way, that won't go back to being the old way, that won't go back to being like, it's okay. Like, even if, like they're not clearly not going to be protesting the rest of their life, but like for the rest of their life, when they hear politicians talk, they have to address these issues and say what they mean about them. For when they see actions going on that is not right, they're going to think about it. When they're at work or in their positions of power and they're looking around the room and they're like, yo, this room doesn't look diverse. Why not? And they're going to go try to fix it. Like, I think that's like what gets changes, is when like people, like everyone starts thinking, being like, yo, we have to look representative. Like, that's like, like that's what, like when now, since when like I sat on the admissions committees at my med school, and now I'm on like the committee to get more residents, I look around and I'm just like, our residents, the doctors should look like the patients we're taking care of. So like, unless we're taking care of all old white male patients, like that shouldn't be what our doctor or surgeon pool looks like. And so like, obviously our surgeon pool doesn't look like all Black males either. So like, I'm not saying like that's what it should be. I'm just saying like there should be more than me. Yeah. Like, I shouldn't be the only one. And so, yeah. And so, and I think people get it. I mean, people definitely get it where I'm at, where I work now. Like they're all on board. Like importantly, like the diversity committee it's not just a bunch of diverse people. I mean, sorry, it's not a bunch of minorities. It's full of diverse people. We have like a bunch of white people on the committee. Like they're as into it as anyone else. And like that's like true progress, right? Like they care about it as much because like they wanted to change as well. And like, then that's how like things start making difference, when it's not just the minorities are the only people who care. It's other people.
Yeah. Well said, man. So we've been at this for a while. Any parting thoughts?
No.
Anything,
do I get
any questions left unanswered?
No. Do I get an Ask Sonia section after this?
Oh yeah. We're gonna dig in deep.
I love it. My favorite part. I meant to ask you that before. That was one of my prerequisites. Like, I'm not signing the release waiver unless I get an Ask Sonia section.
Yeah, man. We'll get the Run It By My Wife going. Yeah, man. Absolutely. Well, dude, Glenn, thanks, man. Like I said, it's like, I don't know, just this conversation in general, like I feel out of my depth, because I felt a lot of pressure. Like, I really wanted this to be a good conversation. And quite frankly, like, probably like you in some ways, I'd imagine, like, I just don't know where to begin.
Yeah.
And I think you said something that actually really stuck with me. I felt like I didn't have the vernacular, right? I didn't know what to ask or really what to talk about. And that's just like a sign of like, well, I probably need to get educated. So like this conversation has certainly helped. And that's something that I'm going to certainly take away from this. But yeah, thanks, man. I just appreciate you being willing to do this.
Yeah, man. White Fragility, How to Be an Anti-Racist. 2 great books.
And I'll post to both
of those. Link them to your show notes.
You're a pro. You know how to do it. All right, buddy. Well, we'll definitely have you back again. And actually, if anyone wants to follow you, where can they do that?
Oh, so I'm on Twitter at DocWalk. And that's the main thing. On Twitter at DocWalk.
Awesome. All right, buddy.
Personally.
I hear you. All right, man. Well, dude, Glenn, it's been awesome talking to you, man, and thank you.